Thanks for tuning in to the Italian Product Group podcast. I'm excited to be on the other side of the interview, and I'll be interviewing Krishna Panicker, who is here with me in the room today. I've known Krishna for about 5 years. We worked together in the past, but I want him to be the one sharing with all of you what is his connection to Estonia and to product management. Krish, can you share with the audience?
My connection to Estonia. I think it's obvious. I'm a native Estonian. I think from my name and so forth. No, seriously, I've had the opportunity to work at 2 startups here. So Skype, if people remember that back in the day, that was a thing. That was the most installed software back in the day, right? When we had hundreds of millions of users. When hundreds of millions of users was like big. That was a big number, not billions. And I've also had the opportunity to work at Pipedrive, which is a CRM product. One was very B2C focused. We got acquired by Microsoft, ended up moving more into the B2B landscape as we looked at Skype for Business. And Pipedrive is all CRM, so pure B2B play, which is where we met.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, we work together at Pipedrive, and but apart from that, you have a great curriculum, let's say. You've worked in many different places, which is why I wanted to, pick your brain and talk about a topic that I'm passionate about, but I also know that is challenging for many people in the industry. So our goal here at TPG is to bring people or the audience into how product is done in different companies in Estonia. And yes, well, Krish, you're located in the UK. He's worked, as you can see now, with companies like Skype and Pipedrive. And it allows us to understand how people who work in these companies think and how these companies function, but also other companies, and bring it a little bit closer to home and outside of those maybe webinars or books that we're all very familiar with. And one of the topics, if we think about Mark Erickson's definition of product management, is that product management sits at the intersection of user experience, technology, and business. But I think this third one, the business, is the one where people struggle the most with. Because why, I wonder, right? I personally, for example, come from, let's say, the UX side. I have no experience designing, but I worked in different support teams. And so I developed a skill to listen and understand customer needs. And that's what I brought as a strength into product management. And you have a lot of people, I believe yourself, right? You come from software development. So that's the tech side of it, right? But then how many people come from business? What does it mean to be business focused in product management?
Yeah. So I think it's, as you say, it's interesting. People come from different backgrounds, which really shapes their perspective. But if we think back to the origins of product management, I recall doing some forms of product management before that term existed. The original term, I think, pretty much came from CPG, right? Consumer packaged goods. You'd have a product manager that would manage a physical product, right? It'd be like a shampoo line, right, or a soap line, and their job was to drive the business, drive revenue for that product line. Right? They're really, it all starts with business, and so I think a lot of folks that probably listen to this really come from that side of thinking about customer empathy, thinking about what is the problem space for the persona they're dealing with. And they think about it as solving problems, typically. And that's great, right? But if I know the Venn diagram, like Kamala Harris, I like a good Venn diagram, right? You got the business, the user experience, the technology. But if I had to reframe it, I actually think it is really everything fits within business. The other 2 circles just sit within it. Because if you're working for a for-profit, which I would say 99% of the product managers here would be, there's no point solving a problem if there's no willingness to pay for this. There's no point having an easy to use product if it's not really driving business in some way. And so I think it's really important to understand the rules of the game, the business game. For example, I'm the VP of product at Airbase. It's a B2B business. And so the rules of the game for me, pretty simple. So it's a SaaS business. So I look at 4 levers, right? So there are 4 business levers. So we have retention, right? What can I do to retain customers? If you like, the analogy I think about is, you pour water in the bucket. If there's a leak in that bucket and you have more water coming out of the bucket than going in, then there's a problem. You really need to pay attention to that lever significantly, right? What can I do to reduce churn and increase retention? That's one lever. Second is around winning and new deals, so sales or logos as they call it in B2B. Also expansion. What can I do to cross-sell, upsell other product lines? And then finally, what can I do maybe to help drive pipeline, right? Maybe increasing TAM, right? So that's the rules of the game that I'm in. But each business, the first thing I think it's important to understand is, hey, what are the levers that drive business? And are the problems I'm solving for, do they line up well with one of those levers? And in fact, what's the right lever I should be paying attention to right now? So it's useful to understand the state of the business, so it helps inform your prioritization.
Okay,
and the
but
problems to look at.
This way of thinking you have right now, I mean, we're talking to someone that is currently VP of product. I think it's very appropriate that as a VP or anyone close to, director level, C-level is thinking about this business level. I think there's no brainer there. But was this the same in your first product roles? How much were you thinking about the business? Maybe if memory fails, right? We all tend to remember things differently than they actually happen. But if you think of your own team members, to what extent do you expect your product managers, right, a junior product manager, mid-level product manager, to think about these levers? And how is that different to the way you have to think about these levers and how that helps your team or guides your teams?
Yeah, that's a good question, Maria. So I think it's a fair point. There is definitely an evolution in thinking that I tend to observe. So that first... a first new PM, or sometimes we look at associate PMs. We tend to introduce an associate PM level to see, look, do you have a problem thinking mindset? Because typically, a lot of people might think of product management as a really interesting or sexy role, and it's about building things, building solutions. And when they come in, they realize, wait, no, this is about solving problems. But that's what we're grounded in. So the first step I often see in that evolution is, what do I build now? I have a team of engineers. I've got to keep them busy. What do I build now? Right? And it's very easy to fall into that feature factory mode. Right? So that's one step. Some people fall into that. I very quickly try and get them to step out of it and say, wait, what problems are you focused on? At least get them to think about, be empathetic with the customer, with certain personas, right, within that. And first, really get to understand the problem space and the landscape. My job in my role is I really try to ensure that they're focused on maybe the right, in the language I use, the right levers, right? So, for example, sometimes I've said to teams, you know what, folks? Retention is really bad. I want you all to focus on areas where retention is weak, right? Go through your support tickets, right? Go through the NPS feedback. Look at all the detractor feedback we're getting. Focus on that. And so for certain squads, it might be that I direct them myself. But I'm not expecting them to look at the P&L and the balance sheet and understand that. I think that's probably an unfair, but that's my job. My job as a leader to help give them that direction. But I do expect my PMs to evolve to a point where they need to understand customer problems, right? Better than me, right? I'll be interviewing customers, but typically the way I might map the organization is each squad might map to a specific problem space and maybe a specific set of personas, and they need to understand that persona's problems better than anyone, better than anyone in the organization.
So if we go back to that Venn diagram, which now you have reorganized into putting business and then UX and technology inside, living inside of it, and product management living inside of it, then how much weight would you give to these elements living inside of business? Because what I keep hearing, and I may be interpreting it wrong, is that customer empathy or that UX side seems to be very important no matter what.
Yeah, so I think I would go back to let's say the Marty Kagan framing here, right? Which is generally when I'm looking at this, whenever I'm working with a team in my role, I'm really looking at, one way of looking at it is helping drive success for the team. But I kind of flip it around. I'm really looking at what are all the reasons they're going to fail. And my job is to help unblock and remove those reasons. So the first question, to kind of alluding to your point, is yes, I check, is this something that is going to be a viable business? So we're pointing at the right, in my case, business levers, right? Second, is this going to be valuable to the customer? In other words, are we solving the right problems? And I really ask my teams, hey, can you stack rank the problems for that particular persona? And does that map to the specific business lever that we're trying to affect, right? And then we look at things like, all right, is this usable? And is this feasible? Which is a technology question. I often find those first two questions, they're not all equal, right? If it doesn't actually help drive the business, and if it's not solving a top problem for the customer, let's not have the discussion about usability and feasibility. It's a waste of time. Let's make sure we answer those first two questions first. And I find it's very easy to get wedded to, hey, but is this usable? Is this easy to use? And we completely bypass the first two.
I'd like to get a little bit practical, right? I'm sure some of you would appreciate some examples of how does this look on the day-to-day work. And when it comes to validating if something is usable, when it comes to validating if this is something that our customer base wants, you've mentioned a couple of things that I think anyone working in product management would be familiar with, which is go to your support tickets, do an analysis of that information, sit with your customer success team and listen to the calls. Put together a quick prototype of the idea you're having and put it in front of a handful of people and run specific set of steps to do a proper testing to see what the answer of that test experimentation gives, to see whether we're on the right track. But what are some examples then, if we're saying that we have to make sure that it's also important for the business? The way I'm seeing it is we have to think of questions to ask, right? And you just gave a few examples of those. But then we also need to understand how we answer them. I mean, what form, what techniques, what jobs do we do on a day-to-day to answer them? And so there's the experimentation or listen to customer success calls and analyze techniques, right? There's the question of what levers are we struggling with? And then the example was retention. So you formulated the right question, but then in what form does the day-to-day product team work or manifest that they are including this business thinking into what they do? Is there?
Yeah, so let's run through a couple of examples, right? Because it's all about context. So let's say we have identified that, to take that example, retention is an issue. We're seeing that we have, in this business, we have high churn. We have a lot of customers going in. So, in that scenario, I don't really care so much about all of these customer requests coming in, right? What I care about are those support tickets, probably. Like, I want to see all the data that is leading to detractors, anything that leads to churn. And so I would ask to say, you know what, let's not do a full widespread analysis. Let's really focus on, for example, support tickets. Let's run through, do the support analysis. Where do we see the big breaks in the system? I would also talk to people that are proximate to the customer, like customer success. They're having conversations. They're probably getting loads of complaints. Let's focus on the complaints, right? Not maybe some of the requests that they're getting, because that lever of retention is needs paying attention to. So that's one part. So I'd really look at where's the problem and what's the research, let's call it that, what's the analysis I need to do that aligns up with retention. Might be that actually retention's great. If retention's at 99%, let's just say, get up. If you have, sometimes you can have higher than 100%. If you look at revenue retention, it might be 110, 120%. I'll be like, yeah, guys, obviously, if there's any big issues, obviously we fix it. Anything critical, absolutely. But let's pay more attention maybe to, let's say, new sales. Let's say we have a business which actually is able to, when we get a customer, we retain them, we can expand revenue well, we cross-sell well, but we're really struggling to get new customers. Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. So now...
marketing should do something. Is that the answer?
Well, maybe what we're getting is a new pipeline. Maybe we have a good pipeline, but when we sell to these prospects now I want to do prospect analysis, not customer analysis, right? Because prospects come in and maybe they have a different expectation of what they want. Maybe there's a whole set of problems that they're looking to get solved from us that we're not unlocking, or maybe we're not positioning ourselves correctly. Maybe we're solving those problems, but that is not obvious to them. Or our pitch, our sales pitch. Maybe it's our sales, but we're not really driving them to the solutions or problems that they need unearthing. So I would go down that path. I would do probably prospect analysis and listen to maybe some of those calls, do discovery there and saying, wait a second, we see a pattern here, right? I've listened to X number of interviews. I've actually joined the sales calls and I'm seeing a pattern. They're asking for things that we hear something different from our customers, right? It might be that we are now tapping into a new segment. Maybe the market's evolved, right? Maybe now that they're looking at competitors, they see competitors have X, Y, Z, and we don't have X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting. Let's dig into that. Let's understand where that gap is between prospect expectation and customer expectation, and at the very least get to a level of value parity, right? So just to throw different examples of what's the problem, business problem we're solving for, and therefore what's the analysis we need to do to help bridge that gap.
And I'm hearing there's so much there, because what I'm hearing is, okay, business is thinking about how all these moving pieces of the business, right? Whether we have incoming new customers, whether we're marketing the right thing, whether we're solving the right problem, whether we're listening to the pain of our existing customers, is what we're solving with our product skills, right? With our engineers, with our design, right? But it seems to get very big. And I have to admit, I hate the analogy of the CEO, the product manager is the CEO of the products, like the CEO of the product. I really dislike that analogy. But when I hear this, it sounds like, okay, maybe there's a reason why it's so popular, because it seems to be like that, like a CEO, you have to be paying attention to all those things. Now, you've worked closer to a CEO than I have. So where do you draw the line? Where do you see the difference between, again, you were thinking as a VP of product or CPO versus the thinking of a product manager doing hands-on work with engineers and designers in, okay, I do need to be listening in to this sales information, but I am not responsible for closing sales. Like, where do we draw the line of, this is what product management needs to know and act upon about business, but this is where they need the other functions to step in?
Yeah. So, look, I can give you my own take on this, but I will I'll be sympathetic because it really depends on the kind of company you work for, how they set you up for success. Because you're right, it's easy to say you should be the CEO of your product, but if we don't empower them to operate like that, then that's tricky, right? It might be that you work in an organization that just sees the R&D function as a feature factory, right? You're not going to be set up for success there. But at least, whenever I set up an organization, I really try and empower not just the PM, actually, the whole squad, right? Engineers, product marketers, designers, like, you guys own this problem space. You tell me what you need. How can I unblock you to solve this? So
by empower, you mean then?
I mean that if they're blocked, make it my problem. Right? Well, yeah, Krish, that's great to say that, but like, we need help from marketing on this, or we need help from support. Great, I'll sort that out.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is, when we say product managers should be thinking about business, they need to understand where are their blockers or opportunities. But if they cannot remove them, then that's where higher roles in product management come to support.
That's an absolutely key role there. The number one role I see of anyone in a leadership role is you are there to serve the team, to unblock them, right? You're not necessarily there to tell them what to do. Often they know what to do better than you do, because they're often closer to the problem, right? Now, obviously, it needs to be lined up with the business impact, like we said, but assuming that's the case, then, yeah, they typically know what problems to solve for. And where they struggle is they often have blockers, right? Mm-hmm. It might be in interfacing with other parts of the org, and that's where leadership has to step in and help unblock.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what we're hearing Chris say is, if you're blocked and you're not getting support, call your leadership team. But you're responsible for bringing up exactly where do you need help, how do you need help, what are the obstacles. Is that a good way to?
Yeah. Now look, it's like I say, it's very easy for me to say this. If you're not getting that support, you can only elevate to the point at which you get the support from your leadership, right? So, if you're not getting that support from them, you need to make that very clear. Look, if you don't unblock, this is the cost of not doing this, right? And so you're making it very clear to the leadership team, right?
I love that we're using finally a finance word. When I first reached out to Krish to talk about this topic today, I talked about the product manager's roles in financial side of the business, and Krish refers to business impact. But you said the word cost. Yeah. You need to bring them clarity of what's the cost of not solving this problem. How does that look? Are we actually talking about numbers here, money numbers in cost, these many millions of euros or dollars, or what do we mean by cost?
So look, every business has their own language here, but I would start with very simple language, right? I don't think you need to put necessarily, in a lot of cases, you don't necessarily put a revenue number here, but if at the very least you can articulate, look, this is the lever we can impact. We know this is the most important lever. 2, this is the biggest problem we can help solve to address that lever. Okay, you've already got my attention, right? And then this is and so now we're talking about relative cost, right? We're talking about this is the most important business lever, and this is the biggest problem we can solve for, right? So the specifics of, but what does that lead to in terms of lost revenue, maybe churn, maybe new sales, maybe expansion, right? That's a tertiary element. At the very least, highlight the first 2. Different organizations work differently, right? I'm working in a very high velocity organization where it's much more important for me to understand the relative cost and the relative value, because we need to make very, very fast decisions.
How does that look? How does the relative cost or relative value look like? Can you give me an example?
Simple, it's the stack rank. So it might be that I'll ask the team, like, hey, why are you even solving this problem? Oh, because this is going to help improve retention. Great. I might ask how much, but let's bypass that. But then I'm looking for, okay, show me all the problems you think that map to retention, and now stack rank them.
Mm-hmm.
That's already, as a primary and secondary way of looking at it, that's already useful, right? I know you're driving the right business lever, and I see you're looking at this sequence of 5 problems to solve for, and you believe that this problem is going to address a large part of the retention issue.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And it might be that there's qualitative data, which is, hey, it takes me 10 seconds to log in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't really need to see a spreadsheet breaking down the revenues. Like, let's freaking fix that,
Mm-hmm.
right? 10 seconds, it should be taking half a second. It should be taking less than that, 300 milliseconds. And that alone is all I would need, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is, I get it, that's the biggest issue. 90% of our requests come from there. End of discussion, fix it.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing here is it's easy to say things like, oh, there's 2 sides of the coin. One side is the product and customer metrics, and the other side is the financial metrics. But what I see is actually a little bit more complex. This is the first time in the conversation you bring up, for example, a product metric, and I wanted us to get us to that point. And we haven't even talked about the financial metrics, right? So you've been talking about levers, but you also said that in some businesses it might be something else. Is there always a business lever to look at depending on the business that is different from, for example, those 4 you mentioned in your particular context?
So just to clarify the question, you're saying in my business, is there anything, does everything always have to map to a business lever?
No. In your business, there's these 4 levers.
Yeah.
But in any other business, do I understand correctly that the way you see it, there is always a business lever, even if it's not these 4?
Yeah. So if you don't understand the impact it's going to have, now often people have a innate feeling that, like, we should fix this, right? It's going to make the customer happy, right? Guess what? That probably is a business lever. You probably haven't articulated like that.
Okay.
For example, we might talk at delighters. This is a delighter. We should work on these delighters. Okay. Why? Is it what's the benefit to the customer? I get that. What's the benefit to the business? Often there is a benefit to the business. It might be that we have a hypothesis, but delivering delighter X will increase our net revenue retention by 10%. So in other words, on average, we have customers staying with us for 36 months, and we've now just increased that by 3.6 months. That's money, right? It might be quite subtle, but that is money, right? If we're truly delivering value and we're truly delighting the customer, do you have a hypothesis, just a hypothesis, that it's going to increase retention? If the answer is yes, let's keep talking. If the answer is, well, I don't think so. I think that actually that they're going to like it, but it's not, I don't perceive that's going to increase our retention by any amount. Okay, well, should we look at a different one then? Because if you don't have a belief, at least a belief, a hypothesis that it's going to increase some lever somewhere, then maybe we solve a different problem.
But then who makes that full picture connection, right? On one hand, we have to have someone thinking about the customer. We need to understand then how those problems, needs, wishes, dreams from customers are relevant to the business. And someone has to translate that into financial numbers. How do we connect these 3 worlds together? And the roles that people play in connecting this, what is it like? A product manager, a VP of product, a CFO, how do they connect these dots together? Where does one pass the baton to the other?
So firstly, in my world, it all starts with the PM. So I'm expecting the PM not to just look at one dimension, but to look at all those dimensions. And you said 3, I really see it as 2, right? You might articulate them in different ways, but you're looking at what's the customer outcome that you're after? In other words, what value are you delivering to the customer? How are you helping them in their world? How are you helping save them time, save them money, save them anxiety, whatever that value is? And what impact is that going to have to the business itself? Both those things need to be true. I don't treat those things in isolation. That starts with the PM. And they would probably engage the right people to help the fidelity of how you answer that, right? So in some organizations, depending again, all depends on context. Some organizations maybe you need to engage with finance and say, look, here, the reason I'm doing this is I want to bring down the cost of running the business. So maybe this is a cost reduction exercise. Maybe you've moved to a system where you have a support team where you have 20, 30 agents. We've cut all headcount, and now we're going to use more automation. So maybe we use a chatbot, right? You see this as becoming a common trend, and that's going to massively reduce cost, right? Maybe 50% of these requests we can deflect, and the cost can come down. And that would probably need a unit economics discussion with someone in finance to break that down.
The product manager needs to be involved in that unit economics discussion?
The product manager would engage with someone from finance. And again, I'm spitballing an idea with you. Yeah, I would expect them to engage with someone from finance, and probably in this case, someone from customer support, maybe the customer support manager, to at least run down their hypothesis and assumptions about how they work out, the breakdown of that cost structure.
So do you believe, because I hear some people in the industry saying that product managers should have some economics and finance knowledge. They should know what unit economics is. They should know how to read a income sheet, for example. What's your take on that?
No, I think, look, everyone has different levels of knowledge. I think with all of this, I don't know everything. Guess what? I'll call in finance. So just recently, I won't talk about the initiative, but just recently, there was a very complex contribution margin that had to be calculated. You need to bring in finance. Say, I'm not going to trust myself on that. And said, there are about 10 different factors that could affect the contribution margin. So can you do an analysis, break it down and run it through and walk me through it? Right? Finance are there to help. Right? You should see them as a partner there and work with them, get closer to them. So don't worry if you don't understand it.
But you have to have at least a minimum, let's say, critical thinking, right? To be able to ask the right questions, to be able to understand where your gap is. And
you need to, at the very least, you clearly need to understand what's the goal you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to reduce cost? Are you trying to increase new sales? Are you trying to increase expansion? Are you trying to increase retention? At the very least, understand those goals. Understand, or at least have some thinking around what are the assumptions you're making about the factors and dimensions that will affect that change. And typically finance will just ask you, okay, how much do you think you can increase deflection by? Let's face it, it's a guess, right? But these what starts off a guess has become very useful because you start now understanding the range of assumptions you can make. And that's a much more useful exercise. I think the exercise is not so much useful to get the number. It's much more interesting to understand, wait, what are the dimensions I can play with to affect those numbers? And that thinking is much more useful because you start to understand that not all of these dimensions, not all of these levers are equal. You realize, wait, this has a far greater impact. This dimension has a far greater impact than this dimension. So you learn a lot from that discussion. As you start bouncing ideas, bouncing hypotheses, you start focusing on the right areas. And yes, you get up with a number in the end. How often does that number match reality? Not often, quite frankly. But that's fine. I think at the very least, start with some assumptions.
That's fine as long as the context in which you're in accepts it's fine, right?
True. This is true. Very true. So in my case, like I said, I'm much more interested in velocity. So if I know there are, for example, 3 initiatives, and this initiative we feel will have 3 times the impact of this initiative, do I need to know the specific number? I know it's 3 times. I know it has 3 times the impact. hypothetically. Let's just do that. I don't want to spend time decision making there. In other environments, let's call them more mature companies, maybe where maybe it's a low growth environment, maybe where cost is absolutely key, maybe contribution margins are key, where you can drive more revenue through reducing contribution margin, increasing maybe the price of the product, right? Probably take a very different approach. You do a far more in-depth analysis, and it's all about context. What kind of organization are you working for? And when are they ready? How much trust do they have in the team? And how much analysis do they expect to be done before making an investment? Because in some cases, an organization, when you're running a team, that cost is going from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. And so if the cost of running an initiative is very high, it's understandable the organization wants more analysis on that. So yeah, the type of organization you have, the context of what you're doing will really shape how much analysis is expected.
All right. Which brings me to another question that I ask myself, because people keep bringing it up as yet another skill that product managers should have, which is the ability to write business cases. And I'm going to attempt and answer myself based on what you said about the value is when you're trying to understand what the potential impact of an idea you're considering or solving a problem you're considering is not in the number itself, but it's in that process of understanding, right? And maybe a business case is simply a tool to give you some structure to start thinking about those questions, right? If we're only thinking about the customer and then we fail to engage with our stakeholders in a healthy conversation of why we are not getting support, it's because we're not bringing that business thinking. And the value of bringing that business thinking and not just the customer side of it then is we're going to have more, yes, at the beginning more difficult. Maybe we won't have the language, maybe we won't have the right roles involved, but as we do it more and more, then we start understanding how those pieces move together, and then we can more intentionally say, I need support in here. Here's the risk that we see. Here is an opportunity that we should go after right away because these are the symptoms we're observing. So what's your take on these specific requirements that some companies keep on bringing to the surface? Like, yes, product managers must be writing business cases.
Yeah, so it's a tricky one, right? I can really just talk to some of the environments that I've seen. But the one thing that I would do is really understand, what are you trying to achieve from this business case actually? But I can go through the exercise, what are you actually trying to achieve? And often, at least my observation is, are we focusing on the right things? Have you at least thought through the assumptions that you've made? Right. And maybe there are other ways to do that than just filling out a spreadsheet. Right. And so really having a conversation with leadership and saying, look, I see there's a process here. Why do you actually want this? What are you actually trying to achieve from this? Because sometimes it's useful to maybe educate. So for example, often, as we know in product, the first time we release something, it doesn't suddenly make $1 million, right? Often that first release, we're just testing it with 4 or 5 customers, getting some feedback, learning. And so the first thing I would do is understand, look, hey, let's make sure we understand the cycle that we work. This is how we understand the problem, validate this, understand when we can scale. That's useful because those are some assumptions you want to bake in. You need to often allow some time, in some cases, to incubate an idea. If it's a high risk area, you want to incubate it. So I would start with that, right? It's such a broad question. I would at least start with, why do we want to do this? Is there a better way to get to that answer? If the answer is, look, I just want to understand what's the most impactful initiative. It's like, well, look, maybe I can answer that better by looking at relative impact, right? And not look at absolute. Because often I find that quicker. right? Especially if I'm working in a fast velocity environment. I just need to know, is this thing going to have more impact than all the other things, the initiatives that you have in mind?
But we never really know, right? So I think that's one of the main challenges that product managers face, which is, yeah, we may have this relative impact, but we're not convincing anyone with it. Maybe you, in your position as a VP of product, agree with it, and lucky the teams that work with you. I've had that talk. But what about in environments where relative numbers are not convincing anyone in the room?
Yeah, so the first thing I would do is go to your product leader, fail, right? Because what I would look for there is, as much as possible, is have a conversation with product leaders. What's the best way for us to articulate the impact, the value that we can have? Help us have those conversations with the stakeholders, like head of finance, right? Or head of sales. So I would engage them, because you're right, stakeholder management is absolutely key. And it's a completely different language for some folks, right? They've not worked with product, they don't understood the sheer amount of uncertainty. Because you're right, you're never sure, right? You can write a beautiful business case and it can be completely flawed. It looks great, but it can be completely flawed because those assumptions are completely off. And like I say, I often find a lot of people find value in having a discussion around the assumptions. And I find that if you engage the stakeholders in that conversation, say, hey, what do you think about these assumptions? What are your thoughts on this? And I think if they understand, if they're engaged in the assumption conversation, you often find they get more buy-in, because they've actually injected a lot of their assumptions in. So regardless of the number, they understand the thinking behind it, the assumptions behind it, and they often find that they're better bought in to the initiative you might have in mind.
What about from the other side? Would you have any advice for people in important stakeholder positions that have a hard time understanding the process of exploring potential new opportunities when you're going from 0 to 1, whether it's in an existing company or not? And suddenly you have a stakeholder asking a team that has been put together to come up with a new idea, with a new product, to give numbers on their monthly recurring revenue when they haven't even yet validated an idea. What advice do you have for that person on the other side that is only thinking in terms of numbers, and maybe they don't fully understand, what it's like to identify the right problems to solve, how uncertain it is to test all these potential ideas?
Yeah. So, the conversation I'll probably have with them is, again, it's around expectation management. So the more uncertain in areas, and typically 0 to 1 is highly uncertain, I would talk about the fact that, look, I wouldn't cost anything in right now. For the first X months or quarters or whatever that period is, assume 0 revenue, but assume also that this is a bet. We are making a bet. And let's get real about this. A lot of what we're doing is bets. Now it's about what confidence do we have in this bet. And again, get them engaged during these conversations, saying, hey, let's have the team check in with us. Assume no revenue. Are you prepared to do that? Are you prepared to make a bet, have the team check in with us, and let's have them share their findings? If you're not getting confidence, if you're not seeing increasing confidence as we go through, maybe we should kill it. But give them visibility. Again, this is all about open this up to more stakeholders. I think if they feel bought in, if they understand the risks that we're taking, the uncertainties that's here, but also the upside opportunity, you'll probably find that they're going to be much more engaged.
All right. I hope some folks out there are taking notes. I would now like to shift a little bit to, again, I like to go into the trenches, as they say, right? Because you see out there job postings and what's required for a product manager, and you see very vague things like vision and strategy. And you're like, okay, what's the CPO doing that, if the product manager is doing vision and strategy. And you also see able to understand and talk to customers and come up with solutions to ideas. But you don't see anything that indicates that they should be thinking about the business. At the same time, it is expected that whatever they do has certain business impact. So how do you look for people to join your team? How do you understand whether they have this kind of thinking? How do you assess that?
So again, it depends on what role I'm hiring for, right? So the more senior the role, the more likely I have that expectation, right? If I'm hiring for a junior PM, a mid-level PM, I'm probably actually not expecting that, if I'm frank with you. I need to know, can you execute, right? Can you execute well? Can you work with the team? Do you have empathy with the customer? Because I can't teach you how to have empathy for the customer. If you don't have empathy for the customer, I'm screwed. Like, that's not going to work. But I can teach you maybe around business impact. That is something I can show you, right? But of course, as I'm working with a more senior role, say a director role, some cases a GPM, a group product manager, then I am going to really dig in a little bit more of, okay, talk to me in the language of business impact. Talk me through what was the business model of the company you were at? What levers were you able to push? How did you do that? Talk me through that. So what was the actual impact? Talk through the numbers with me there. So yeah, it depends on the seniority of the role. And like I say, as you know, Maria, some people, if they don't have that problem thinking mindset, it's just not going to work anyway. Business impact, that's something that I think PMs can learn that.
Love it. I was having a discussion with one of my peers from TPG on that, which one to compromise, right? Which one can you teach, in which one it's definitely unteachable and they should come with it, because you have a lot of people that are on the other side of the spectrum. They're just obsessed with numbers, and then they discard anyone who's not thinking in terms of numbers. But I have to admit it, no bias here whatsoever, but when I joined product management, my biggest strength was understanding customers, and I only learned the business side towards,
and that's quite common.
Decade.
That's quite common, and hopefully your manager, your business, your product leader, or engage with finance, they can help you with that, right? Because every game is different. When I say game, I mean the game of business, right? If the game is chess, understand the rules of chess. What are the levers here, right? What are the moves you can make? If it's Go, what are the rules there, right? So you need to, as you go into business, it's useful to understand those levers, because otherwise you might be doing work that you think is delivering impact, but it turns out it isn't at all. Right? And so you need to understand the assumptions that are being made and the rules of the business game.
Which brings me, by the way, to guest post we had in tpg.ee from Mikhail Sheglov, if I'm saying it right, where he was talking about the business metrics and how he kept on seeing in in product manager interviews, how when he asked them, what would you measure? What metrics, would you pay attention to? They just kept on bringing a bunch of random metrics that seemed important, because the list of things you can measure can, grow very long.
Endless, yeah.
And he was like, no, actually, you have to bring it down to the business model, which he sort of narrowed down to 4 of them, right? Advertising, middleman, take rate, SaaS, and direct to consumer. And I believe that's what you're also saying, right? Know the rules of the game in which you are. And the game is pretty much what business model you're in.
Correct.
Right? And then understand from there, what should you be looking at, right? Daily active users, is a new ARR, whatnot. But also, where are you in that problem solution stage, right? Are you starting from scratch? Can you afford that period of 0 revenue while you validate? Do you have the resources to support these teams, right?
Yeah, you need to check, on that latter point, you really need to check what is the risk appetite.
Yes.
Right, from leadership. Because if the risk appetite is there, so okay, fine. right? You want much more certainty, right? That means we now need to really focus maybe on these things here, right? But often what I find is it's more nuanced, right? Often you find, well, look, 80%, really, we need to have confidence in this 80%. And maybe in 20%, we can take more risk. We can take riskier bets, right? Often it's not 100% or 0%. Well, find out what that is. What is that risk appetite? You'll often find it isn't 0. And you definitely won't find it's 100%, right? So what is that? Have that open conversation.
Unless you're in a startup.
If you're in a startup, you're starting. It's all risk. It's all risk.
It's always risk, right? All right. Listen, there's tons of questions that I could ask you and that the folks share with me to ask you as well. But we could be here having a conversation for 3 hours. So maybe we can start wrapping it up with some of the key points that I believe we covered today. But, if you want to add something specific in all this product management and how product managers should be thinking about business and this Mark Erickson Venn diagram, which I think we've now
we've redrawn it.
We've redrawn it, yes.
Yeah. It's more like an owl. It's a big circle.
And now
two eyes.
And the owl is the business.
The face is the business.
Where's the body?
We need a full circle. Let's work on it.
All right. That's the first iteration of the redesign. I do want to cover this last one, which is, and I think it's related to this risk appetite of the context in which you are, which is, what are some tips we can give teams that are constantly being pushed for short-term results? Results every quarter, what they're working on needs to show business results. How realistic is this? Is it maybe industry specific? Is it not? And how can they manage that? Should they run away from that company instead? Or what do you recommend to these folks that are being...
Yeah, it's really, there isn't one answer, right? So it's all context sensitive. So I'm not going to talk about industry and so forth, because there's many industries I haven't worked in. But it is very important to have that open conversation of, okay, we need short-term results. Are we going to be taking any long-term bets? So maybe there's a reason we need short-term results, because if we don't get these short-term results, we don't have a runway. If we don't have a runway, we're dead. That's really useful to understand. Why we focus on short-term results? Maybe that's a very good thing. Literally, we die if we don't do this. And if we don't deliver the short-term results, we won't even have the opportunity to work on long-term opportunities, right? So understand the why. What's the motivation behind that? And maybe that will help you understand if you should stay in that organization or not.
Right. Thank you. And then in your experience and based on what we just spent some time discussing then, how would you kind of divide, if there was a proportional way to do this, the financial responsibility or the responsibility of the financial results of the business between product, marketing, sales?
So in reality, you cannot uncouple these things, right? What contribution does this leg have to walking? And what contribution does that have to walking? Do I get 50% of the way there just with this leg?
I think an anatomist would be able to analyze me and tell you that.
Right? Like they all have to work together in tandem, right? They're all connected, right? So it's nice to say, like you contribute X and you contribute Y. In reality, to me, the unit of value is when you bring them all together, right? So, in an ideal world, I'd like to have a squad that has not just product design and engineering. I would actually like to have a customer support. In my team, we have typically customer support is aligned to them. I'd like to have someone in customer success aligned with them. I'd like to have someone in sales, someone in marketing, right? Don't always have the luxury. We don't have enough people, let's be clear. But we need to loop these teams in because they're working together, right? I know sometimes the OKRs are set up in a way that they're departmental, but I think that's quite dysfunctional. I think we all need to work together to get the real results that we were looking for.
Like teams would be the equivalent of little business units, but
Yeah, so you give them, as a collective, you give them ownership of a business driver, right? And so therefore, there's a little bit of marketing, right? A little bit of product marketing, a little bit of support, a little bit of everything, right? It might be, for example, if you're selling a brand new product, actually you probably do need someone in sales that's lined up with that, because there's probably a whole sales demo environment you need to set up. There's probably a whole new sales script that's set up, right? There's a whole set of enablement material you'll need to set up. So, in that case, yeah, sales needs to be aligned with what they're doing, and they all need to be brought together to deliver on those results.
Got it. All right. So, Krish, I'm going to start wrapping up. I'm going to share what I feel are the key takeaways of our conversation, and if there's anything also you want to add at the end of these to wrap up the topic. But what I'm taking away from this is that product management has to be thinking about the business impact. There's no question of just think about the customer and then the business impact, unless you're a junior, but someone's going to expect it to work with you on adding to that part of the equation. You need it in the equation, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
2, engage finance and engage the leadership in the questions you're asking, in the conversations you're having about what problems to solve. I think a lot of people out there are not having conversations with finance at all. So that's a key takeaway. Engage finance and engage the leadership team. Especially if what they're asking of you is not understandable. Try to understand more. Why is it short-term focus that we need, which is another key takeaway. Short or long-term or mid-term focus is not good or bad per se. It depends on the context and why do we need to engage in short-term. Are we agree?
Yeah. And also make that conversation wider, right? So, okay, look, I have 10 engineers. Should I be putting 100% in short term? Or maybe 50% or 80%? That's a useful conversation to have, because often it's not black or white. It's typically allocation. What allocation should I be putting in each?
Also, don't think in terms of absolute numbers and reading specific finance numbers. It's okay to start getting familiar with those terminologies because they are connected to those business impact or levers, right? But think in terms of relative cost. We believe this is more impactful than that. We are seeing more, we're losing more customers to this reason, to that reason, for example. And there is no ideal way to divide the business impact responsibility between the different functions. We need to work in unison, right?
Yeah.
And ideally, if we can organize teams that they're cross-functional beyond the product functions and include also some commercial functions as part of that cross-functional unit, even better, right?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
It's been lovely finally having this conversation with you, Krish. If there's anything you want to share with the Tallinn product community, please. And where can they find you? How can they be helpful to you?
Yeah. So, no, I think the only thing I can say is I'd like another hot tea. But otherwise, you can find me on LinkedIn, Krishna Panicker. Very Google friendly. Turns out there aren't many people with that first name, surname. Yeah, that's it.
Yes.